Hello to all my fellow Germans from Russia and Central Oklahoma chapter of AHSGR cousins and other family members who are also descendants of Germans from Russia. I'm recording and doing anew the presentation that I gave on February 21st of 2026 to the Central Oklahoma chapter of Germans from Russia on the subject of Catherine's manifesto. Hopefully this is a little bit more complete and hopefully much more coherent than when I presented that. All right, here we go. So what comes to mind when you hear the term Catherine's Manifesto, or Manifesto of Catherine the Great? Almost all Germans from Russia of the heart alive can relate somewhat to this manifesto. We've all, almost all of us have at least heard the term, whether we understand it all or not. But many of us think of freedom of religion, freedom of military service, free land, freedom from taxes for a certain period. That most of us have kind of a warm, fuzzy feeling for Catherine for what she did, thinking this was out of the goodness of her heart, which you'll find out later was not necessarily so. And let's get started. All right, this is my title, an in-depth dissection of the entirety of the July 22nd, 1763 Manifesto of Catherine the Great. Quite a mouthful. I use the term dissection because I'm a retired surgeon, and this made sense to me. So here's a couple of sources that you can find easily on the web. These are English translations. I used two others. One was a Fred Koch translation from the German text from the original manifesto document. It's held in the archives in Ulm, Germany. Also, I used a translation from the Russian by Charles Buckley Peterson as part of his 1969 PhD dissertation. I kind of melded these together to obtain a coherent thought from each. Well, before we think of Catherine, actually, decades before Catherine, other Russian leaders had attempted to colonize the empire south of South Russia, particularly south of the Volga River. They wanted to recruit immigrants with skills needed to develop the country. The Russian government had conquered many of these lands through a series of Russo-Turkish wars, particularly the area around the Black Sea, even and east over into and including Kazakhstan. Anyway, this area was teeming with band of roving bandits and highwaymen, and this made settlement and travel through this area almost impossible. And another interesting factor is that this part of southern Russia, lower Volga, was very important because it's crossed by one of the main Silk Road routes from China and India to the west. An attempt was first made in 1731 to lure Russian citizens to that area. But since there was no military presence or protection in that area, there's almost no interest whatsoever. In 1732, Empress Anna Ivanova resettled a group of 1,000 Don Cossack families along the Volga River under the pretext of protecting and stabilizing the frontier. However, the Cossacks actually made very poor colonists because they often took part in looting and became highwaymen and bandits themselves. in the 1740s, attempts were made to entice Russian serfs to that area. However, the serfs were bound to the landowners who didn't have any interest in releasing their workers or weakening the class system. And they were particularly reluctant to create new farms in this troubled region, which would compete for them with trade of their goods. So as a result, the government began to look beyond its borders for colonies. Empress Elizabeth actually invited foreigners during her reign. She kind of worked out, and her government worked out the basic legal and economic questions. And a government resolution encouraging settlement in Russia was sent to the Russian ambassadors living abroad in May of 1759. However, the active recruitment could not take place until after the 7 Years' War, as all of Europe was in a turmoil. And unfortunately, Elizabeth died in January of 1762 and did not get to see any of her visions and colonization plans carried out. Then Catherine the Great became Russian ruler in July of 1762 after a coup against her husband, who interestingly, mysteriously died 3 days later. Shortly after becoming the next empress, Catherine II approved a new colonization policy designed to benefit the empire in her just a statement of, I guess, a document in October of 1762. Her first manifesto was in December of 1762. It was printed in all these languages you can see here. And this actually failed miserably because there was absolutely no administrative structure to plan and manage the implementation of a program this big. Her second manifesto was issued on July 22nd, 1763, at the end of the 7 Years' War. This was perfectly timed to appeal to the war and tax-weary European populace. Copies of the manifesto were printed in newspapers and on leaflets that were distributed throughout Europe, but with a special focus on the German-speaking lands, which was probably the most devastated from the 7 Years' War, and she was a German. These lands at that time, there was no Germany as a nation. They were comprised of small principalities, counties, duchies, city-states, all of which were a part of the Holy Roman Empire of what later became Germany. Some of these territories, such as the county of Eisenberg, didn't have any legal restrictions preventing their subjects from traveling or migrating to the new lands. This is an actual copy of the manifesto. And the first bold letters, large letters, she states her authority to issue such a proclamation. We, Catherine II, by the grace of God, Empress and autocrat of all the Russians at Moscow, Kiev, Vladimir, Novgorod, Tsarina of Kazan, Tsarina Astrakhan, Tsarina of Siberia, Lady of Plesko, and on and on and on, where she names nearly 50 areas that she was ruler over, and princes of the Lady of the Manor and sovereign of many others. So this was her declaration, kind of why she was issuing this and by what authority. The next section is a statement of purpose, I guess you would call it today. Inasmuch as the vast expanse of our empire's territories was fully known to us, we perceive that, among other things, no small number of such regions still lie unimproved, that could be employed with lucrative ease for the most productive settlement and occupation by mankind, most of which regions conceal within their depths an inexhaustible wealth of multifarious, precious ores and metals. And since the same regions are richly endowed with forests, rivers, trees, and oceans convenient for trade, so they are also exceptionally well adapted for the establishment and growth of many types of mills, factories, and various other plants. This gave us cause for the issuance of this manifesto that was publicized for the benefit of all our loyal subjects on the 4th of December of the past year of 1762. Nevertheless, since we communicated our wishes therein only summarily to those foreigners who might be desirous of making their homes in our empire, we therefore now ordain for the better clarification of this matter the following decree, which we hereby most solemnly confirm and command that it be implemented to proclaim it to all. This is that area which she issued her authority, I guess. And also, I forgot to add also in that second part of the purpose, it was not stated, but there was a desire to mitigate against the marauding bandits and the highwaymen that plundered this area, because particularly this area of southern Russia down around the Black Sea was one of the major routes on the Silk Road, as I mentioned. So she was ruler over quite a large area, the largest ruler or largest land holder, I guess, or more than any other of the European or Asian or other countries in the world at this time, even from parts of Finland to the east or west, to actually including Alaska on her east and down around the Black Sea, Kazakhstan, other areas. So this manifesto caused quite a stir. I mentioned this. Here's the route through Kazakhstan. They came either by boat across the Black Sea or around southern Russia, which is now Ukraine. Here's some of the areas that she mentioned in her statement of authority. So this manifesto actually caused quite a stir across Europe, with many cities and nations enacting prohibitions of their citizens to immigrate. Emperor Joseph II of Austria published a patent of prohibition of immigration, listing many punishments for those who tried to leave. Empress Maria Theresa of Vienna actually went one step farther in her declaration forbidding her subjects from leaving. She said the penalty was a sentence of 5 years of digging trenches. I guess what we would call digging ditches today. The reason for this opposition was primarily a loss of labor and population, particularly since this area had been devastated, particularly by the 7 Years' War. Here's some exemptions. As you can see, the prohibition of migration from Frankfurt, Declaration of Frederick II. And here's another, Ludwig of Hesse. So here we go into the actual articles of the manifesto. Article 1. We permit all foreigners to enter into our empire in order to settle down in any government wherever it may suit each one of them. While this appears on the surface to be a Our sweeping act of inclusivity, all peoples and settle where one desires. Nothing could have been further from the truth, except for those that stayed in Moscow and St. Petersburg. The remainder were kind of shepherded into different designated colonies that had been selected by the Russian government, initially in Lower Russia along the Volga River, and most of them were designated as farmers. This one is kind of self-explanatory. Such foreigners, after their arrival, may announce themselves not only to the guardianship chancellery in our residence, that's her residence there at Oranienbaum, to guardianship chancellery in our residence, especially established for foreigners for this purpose, but also for the convenience of everyone elsewhere at the borders of our empire with their governors, or where they are not available, with the city's foremost commanding officers. Kind of just a check-in, like when we travel abroad and have to go through passport control and present our documents to show where we're from, where we're going, etc. And this chancellery where she accepted them was on the island of Kronstadt, where they initially came. After a brief check there, they came on across to Oranienbaum, which was her main castle there, and quite lovely. Next, since among these foreigners desirous of settling in Russia, there also may be some without sufficient means to defray the requisite travel costs, then the same can report to our ministers and ambassadors at foreign courts, who not only shall transport them to Russia at our expense without hesitation, but also shall provide them with travel funds. So this is quite interesting. It's already obvious that all foreigners who, by virtue of the most high authority of the Imperial Manifesto and the dates, wish to settle in the peaceful empire, and who in particular wish to obtain good and plentiful food by cultivating fertile but uncultivated lands, must expect a willing reception and support from the Russian Imperial Embassy. We would also like to inform you that the arrangement has now been made for them to be offered the following benefits immediately after their arrival and registration in Hamburg or Lübeck, one of the departure places in Germany, by the Russian imperial masters and commissioners there. So initially, an adult man received 8 shillings a day, a woman 5 shillings a day, and a child, regardless of their gender, received 3 shillings a day, which in the Reichs money at that time amounted to around 20 cruisers, 12 and a half or 7 and a half. Therefore, it amounts to for something substantial for a whole family. And second, care will be taken in Hamburg to ensure that they are comfortably and cheaply quartered until they leave for Lübeck, and if necessary, to facilitate the short journey from Hamburg to Lübeck. Easier, a train will be provided for the women and small children. This is one of the warehouses where they were housed in Lübeck before they joined the ships. They kind of waited here and collected a whole group, enough to fill a ship, and then away they went. So thirdly, in Lübeck, wherever possible, accommodation will be provided for their subordinates in order to cover their bill and other needs. The daily allowances previously reported them will always be properly deducted until their embarkation to Russia. Fourthly, if they actually board a ship in Lubeck, they will receive a daily allowance for 14 days on board so that they can buy the necessary food and other supplies for this sea voyage. Finally, if a sufficient number of such souls are gathered in Lubeck, a separate ship which otherwise would not receive any other cargo will be required for their voyage to Russia. And since a separate ship can only be loaded for a group of families, the souls stationed at Lubeck will only have to stay there until there are enough of them together to be able to board their own ship. So these people were gathered in provincial areas like Frankfurt, Büdingen area, and then they were transported to the ports of Lubeck till the ships could meet their quotas, and then off they went to Russia. These are some of the warehouses I mentioned in Lubeck. And interesting, in Büdingen, there were at least 375 weddings at the Marienkirche and others at Lubeck and other ports of departure. The reason for this is that the Russian government would not take a single individual. You had to be married before you could immigrate to Russia. So then, and back up just a little bit on that, they were given money to buy food and supplies for this sea voyage for as much as 14 days. Actually, unscrupulous ship captains would often sort of take the long way around, like a taxi driver in New York, and charge them to be sure that they got all of the monies that were allotted for the voyage, and often for even more funds. So as soon as these foreigners arrived, this is the next part 4 of the manifesto. As soon as such foreigners shall have reached our residence and have reported to the guardianship / chancellery, or likewise at a border city, they then shall be expected to declare their true intentions as to wherein their real desires specifically lie, and whether they shall wish to consent to being registered among tradesmen or in guilds, become city residents, and indeed specifically in which city, or whether they are desirous of settling down to farming or diverse useful trades in segregated colonies or hamlets on unclaimed and productive land, whereupon all such persons shall promptly be granted their choice of compliance with their own wishes and desires, as parenthetically, not so. At the same time, it may be perceived in the appended register where and in which regions of our empire the specific lands unclaimed and suitable for making one's home are available, albeit besides those listed in the aforementioned register, still incomparably more extensive regions and diverse landed properties are to be found, upon which we likewise and authorize anyone to settle, where each shall decide it to be most advantageous to himself. As I mentioned, that was not always the case. They were usually shepherded to particular colonies, areas, and almost all of them were designated as farming. 5, upon arrival in our empire, each foreigner who intends to become a settler and has reported to the guardianship, chancellery, or in other border towns of our empire, and as already prescribed, has declared his decision, must take the oath of allegiance in accordance with his religious right. This is significant in certain groups whose could not swear on the Bible or swear a declaration, but they were given other opportunities to proclaim their allegiance. They were often led in this oath of allegiance by the German pastor of the Lutheran Church in Oranienbaum, where Catherine's castle was. And it was reported that Catherine herself would frequently welcome the colonists in their native German language from the balcony of the great palace, which faces the Gulf of Finland. For item 6, in order that the foreigners who desire to settle in our empire may realize the extent of our benevolence to their benefit and advantage, this is our will. And then the subsections under section 6. Number 1, we grant to all foreigners coming into our empire the free and unrestricted practice of their religion according to the precepts and usage of their church. This is one that we often quote. To those, however, who intend to settle not in cities, but in colonies and villages on uninhabited lands, we grant the freedom to build churches and bell towers and to maintain the necessary number of priests and church servants, but not the construction of monasteries. On the other hand, everyone is hereby warned not to persuade or induce any of the Christian co-religious living in Russia to accept or even assent to their faith or join his religious community, under pain of incurring the severest punishment of our law. No proselytizing. This prohibition does not apply to the various nationalities on the borders of our empire who are attached to the Mohammedan faith. We permit and allow everyone to win them over or make them subject to the Christian religion in a decent way. Number 2, none of the foreigners who have come to settle in Russia shall be required to pay the slightest taxes to our treasury, nor to be forced to render regular or extraordinary service, nor to billet troops, period. Indeed, everyone shall be exempt from all taxes and tribute in the following manner. Those who have been settled as colonists with their families in hitherto uninhabited lands and regions will enjoy 30 years of tax exemption. Those who have established themselves at their own expense in cities as merchants and tradesmen in our residence, St. Petersburg, or in the neighboring cities of Livland, which would be Latvia, Estonia, in German land, Karelia, and Finland, as well as in the residential city of Moscow, shall enjoy 5 years of tax exemption. Moreover, each one who comes to Russia, not just for a short while, but to establish a permanent domicile, shall be granted free living quarters for a half a year. Many of the immigrants were actually housed with Russian families during this time, that 6 months, half a year. Item 3, all foreigners who settle in Russia, either to engage in agriculture and some trade, or to undertake to build factories and plants, will be offered a helping hand and the necessary loans required for the construction of factories useful for the future, especially of such as not yet been built in Russia. This was to encourage any type of new industry that hadn't previously existed in Russia. Number 4, for the building of dwellings, the purchase of livestock needed for the farmstead, the necessary equipment, materials, and tools for agriculture and industry. Each settler will receive the necessary money from our treasury in the form of an advance loan without any interest. The capital sum has to be repaid only after 10 years in equal annual installments in the following 3 years. So basically, they will give in a helping hand to start any enterprise in Russia. 5th item under that is we leave to the discretion of the established colonies and village the internal constitution and jurisdiction in such a way that the persons placed in authority by us will not interfere with the internal affairs and institutions. In other respects, the colonist will be liable to our civil laws. However, in the event that the people would wish to have a special guardian or even an officer with a detachment of disciplined soldiers for the sake of security and defense, this wish would also be granted. So this is the self-rule that we often think of. And civil laws were fine to be ruled over by the colonists. However, criminal activity, murders, and other things were under the jurisdiction of the Russian government. Next item under this, what they're granting to all the settlers. To every foreigner who wants to settle in Russia, we grant complete duty-free import of his property, no matter what it is, provided, however, that such property is for personal use and need and not intended for sale. However, any family that also brings in unneeded goods for sale will be granted free import on goods valued up to 300 rubles. Provided that the family remains in Russia for at least 10 years, failing which it will be required upon its departure to pay duty on both the incoming and outgoing goods. This just means they basically didn't want them to bring in and overwhelm the economy of Russia by bringing in multiple massive amounts of free goods for sale. Number 7, the foreigners who have settled in Russia shall not be drafted against their will into the military or the civil service during their entire stay here. Only after the lapse of the years of tax exemption can they be required to provide labor for the country. Whoever wishes to enter military service will receive, besides his regular pay, a gratuity of 30 rubles at the time he enrolls in the regiment. This is one that we often quote or often remember. It was interesting later on, many of the Mennonites who were pacifists were actually pressed into um, non-military service, but government service, such as forestry, etc. As soon as the foreigners have reported to their guardianship chancellery or to our border towns and declared their decision to travel to the interior of the empire and establish a domicile there, they will forthwith receive food rations and free transportation to their destination. This is self-explanatory, and I apologize for my cough. Next number. Those among the foreigners in Russia who establish factories, plants, or firms and produce goods never before manufactured in Russia will be permitted to sell, and export freely for 10 years without paying export duty or excise tax. This was quite a free hand to the immigrants. Next item. Foreign capitalists who build factories, plants, and concerns in Russia at their own expense are permitted to purchase serfs and peasants needed for the operation of the factories. And I did not know this, and I'm sure that many of us did not know this, but the purchase of serfs, I guess that would be considered a slavery. And I had no clue as to this prior to reading the entire document. Next, we also permit all foreigners who have settled in colonies or visit villages to establish market days and annual market fairs as they see fit, without having to pay any dues or taxes to our treasury. Kind of self-explanatory. Then back to the bold part of the manifesto. All the aforementioned privileges shall be enjoyed not only by those who have come into our country to settle there, but also their children and descendants, even though these are born in Russia, without the provision that their years of exemption will be reckoned from the day their forebears arrived in Russia. So not only the immigrants themselves, but their descendants and their descendants. Next, after the lapse of the stipulated years of exemption, all the foreigners who have settled in Russia are required to pay the ordinary moderate contributions, and like our other subjects, provide labor service for their country. Finally, in the event that any foreigner who has settled in our empire that has become subject to our authority desires to leave the country, we shall grant him the liberty to do so, provided, however, that he is obligated to remit to our treasury a portion of the assets he has gained in this country. That is, those who have been here for 1 to 5 years will pay 1/5, while those who have been here for 5 or more years will pay 1/10. Thereafter, each one will be permitted to depart unhindered anywhere he pleases to go. And I'm sure this was a provision that our ancestors took advantage of when they left Russia to come to the United States. Next, if any foreigner desiring to settle in Russia wishes, for certain reasons, to secure other privilege or conditions besides those already stated, he can apply in writing or in person to our guardianship chancellery, which will report the petition to us. After examining the circumstances, we shall not hesitate to resolve the matter in such a way that the petitioner's confidence and love of justice will not be disappointed. So all this, although this is a pretty all-inclusive manifesto, if you had some other wishes or desired some other enterprise or some other benefit, you could petition the government in writing, and they would actually examine it and just make a decision. So finally, the original was signed by Catherine the Great, and it was printed by the Senate. So, in conclusion, the privileges of Catherine's manifesto were gradually taken away by each succeeding Russian ruler. But the final nail in the coffin was made by Alexander II, the great-great-grandson of Catherine, in 1861. And this is a picture of Alexander. He was known as Alexander the Liberator, as he abolished serfdom. And this was because of a populist movement that was sweeping across all of Europe. In doing so, and granted privileges to the serfs, such as the right to travel, the right to marry, and the right to own land, he took away all their privileges of the Germans in Russia. So this is an in-depth look, and I will close at this time. Welcome any questions or comments via email, and thank you for listening.